everyone, thanks for joining our webinar on data loss prevention in an API-driven world. If you have any questions, you can type them into the webinar Q&A chat. I'd like to introduce our panel of experts. First, we have Richard Bird. He is the CSO here at Traceable. Also, we have Siddhi Padiyar. He is the head of product management here at Traceable. Then joining us, we also have Veeravan Subramanian, the senior director of product management at Zscaler, and Manu Anand, VP of Product at ArmorBlocks. So thanks, gentlemen, for joining. Let's go ahead and jump right in. I have some questions I would like to kick over to you. First, for you, Richard, from a CISO lens, what are the prime considerations for data loss prevention across categories now? And do you see the CISO community being confident that the controls in place are robust enough to protect critical data?
Well, I'd start with the last part of that question first from a CISO's perspective. And for those that haven't had an opportunity to hear me speak before, I'm on the solution side now with Traceable, but actually my background includes 20 plus years on the enterprise corporate side in IT executive management. I was a CIO. I was also a CISO, several executive director, managing director roles in security. So, kind of coming from that background, looking at where the state of DLP is today, I think that answering the last part of that question first is no. CISOs really don't feel strongly that they've got all of the potential leakage use cases, all of the pathways for data to be exfiltrated, all of the access points and endpoints that are available. I don't feel like there's really much consensus that there's a great amount of control and confidence across that landscape. There's a historical association there, which is, when we used to protect our data, we were really isolating down to data center structures with, database security and privileged access management on those data stores. There wasn't a tremendous amount of data in transit. We pulled a cartoon lever every night and massive amounts of data moved from one mainframe application to another mainframe application. But the level of data that we see today dwarfs the level of data that we saw, say, a decade ago in data centers where we're using specific point solutions. And so when we kind of think about the diversity of the landscape as it relates to threat for the CISO, there are a multitude more ways for data to get out of your organization these days than there used to be. And that problem has only grown exponentially with, the rise of not just one cloud provider, but multiple cloud providers. And I'm still on premises, and I'm still using, vendor hosted and third-party solutions. So this exponentially growing network of complexity has created massive opportunities for data leakage. And that landscape is bigger than it was a decade ago, and that's why I think there's a lot of concern in the practicing CISO community about their ability to get their arms around their data.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And this one's for you, Veeravan. Data loss prevention has centered around email security, NGFWs, SSE, and CASB. Can you explain how the DLP space has evolved given your experience across security companies?
Sure. First, Jen, thanks so much for having me on this webinar. Manu, Sudeep, and Richard, very excited to speak with you. And Jen, addressing your question, I think if you look at data security, I would focus on 4 areas really. First is, where is my data, right? Is that data on premises? Is it in SaaS applications, public cloud applications? Is it in email? Is it in sanctioned apps, unsanctioned apps? You first need visibility to see where your data is. The second one is you want to identify what part of your data is sensitive, right? And then who can access that data? Can my employees access it? Can partners access it? If people leave my company, can they access it? Or can even third-party applications who integrate via APIs access that data? And then the fourth part is, now that I know where my data is it sensitive? Who can access it? Can I enforce consistent policies across, the different channels that we have, right? So if you look at evolution, we started with, a lot of data moving to the cloud. That was evolution 1. But now what we've seen is that if you think your data is actually sitting in Office 365 or G Suite or AWS, you are right, but you're also wrong because, for example, you have a bunch of employees who install Calendly as an application, and little do you know that Calendly actually has access to your data in Google Drive and Google Calendar, can add a phishing link. So there's a lot of blind spots on where your data is. And also, people want to get their jobs done, right? Most of the time, you don't want to be you don't want to block them from doing the actual job. You want to enable them. So user coaching, how do you allow them to surgically get their job done while your data doesn't get compromised, are some of the newer challenges that we see. And it's very, very important for an enterprise to keep their employees engaged, but also their data sensitive and secure at the same time.
Thank you. That was a very comprehensive answer. Next one's for you, Sudeep. Traceable recently announced the Zero Trust API access. That was well received. So how does DLP at API layer play into that framework?
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting way to kind of bring in the data loss prevention in the context of zero trust, and that's something, Jen, as you know, we've been trying to do that at Traceable. We are the first vendor to go in that direction. But I just wanted to kind of put that in context, with how the whole API security and the attacks are today, right? So if you look at, and this is from third-party industry research, and if you look at the focus around sensitive data breach aspect, the privacy issues due to data exposure, and these are the top attacks that we are seeing. So that's what got us thinking that, at the API layer, which is primarily in data in motion, and the fact that the sensitive data in request and response bodies, the ones which are in headers, and the ones which are in path param sometimes, all of that has to be looked at in the overall context of how are you securing your data as they traverse between APIs, right? So if you see the large number that you see on the sensitive data and the privacy issues is what really got us thinking on the zero trust aspect. So the data loss prevention forms a big aspect of our overall zero trust initiative. So if you see how we are looking at it across the board, and this is with mapping it with the way the NIST framework talks about zero trust, both on the sensitivity of the resource and the data, and the least privilege principles, there is a lot to be done on the data loss side. So if you look at the data classification we do, how it ties into compliance when you have data going in and out of APIs, the risk posture, the conformance aspects, as well as the roles and vulnerabilities. That is how we see API DLP in the context of zero trust for APIs, and we've seen that kind of work very well in environments where there's a lot of sensitive data, either because most of these are API first environments, where the traditional mechanisms of data in motion have now all been migrated, where the data is actually going in and out of APIs. So that is how we see the two coming together.
So, Sudeep, if I could, I think there's a little bit of an additive piece there that ties back to the question that I had about CISO's concerns as it relates to data protection and DLP. And I think that a great example of something that you just said is something that's not clearly understood in the greater technology landscape right now, which is it is possible to exfiltrate massive amounts of data without ever touching core systems, which is a very interesting kind of nirvana state or utopian state for bad actors, because they don't have to worry about monitoring, they don't have to worry about alerting, they don't have to worry about multiple levels of control that they have to breach or broach. They simply can take advantage of the payloads that are associated with the APIs themselves and aggregate and accumulate that information in a way that makes it much more difficult for us to discover them, to track them, and to block them if we don't have a focus on how to protect data across all of these different component pieces.
That's an excellent point. And if you see the attacks in the last 6, 9, 12 months, they're actually validating what you just said, Richard. So the fact that whether it's in large telcos or large financials or even fintech companies which have large focus, even there we've seen the breaches. So you're absolutely right. The aspect around data exfiltration, which we are seeing at the API layer, is something which is getting worse and worse. And that's where the emphasis needs to be, especially for the use cases of DLP around data in motion.
Well, I'd be very interested, Manu and Bhairavan, for your guys' perspectives, because I think it's funny when I have conversations and we share that kind of specific example of a real-world threat or exploit that we've actually seen, and our the counterparts that we're talking to go, "No, it's impossible," or they go, "No, that can't happen," right? And we're like, "No, we actually are telling you something that we've actually seen in production." And I'm sure that you guys have seen, levels of, types and levels of exploits that many people haven't even thought about or haven't paid attention to because they're so focused on primary use cases for DLP as opposed to how the bad actors might actually be using new tools.
Absolutely, Richard. Maybe I'll give you one example where we've seen some bad actors where they publish applications in the Office Store and Google Store, and they try to name these applications very similar to popular applications like, a Starbucks add-on to G Suite. And when they add these applications, it asks for a host of permissions like read, write, complete access to drive files. And we've seen some of these bad actors also, these third-party plugins, their API keys are kind of hard-coded and available in public GitHub. So anyone could just access the keys, and if anyone in your enterprise had actually installed that application, they can suck all that data out. And we've definitely seen that in some enterprise customers where people have installed applications and administrators are kind of completely blind to this. Not only that the application exists, but the extent of permissions that end users have given to these applications.
Yeah, and so on the subject of Google add-ons, to Manu, email DLP has evolved rapidly over the years. So now that Office 365 and Gmail control most of the email traffic, what are some common indicators of data loss related to email in these environments?
Yeah, first of all, again, thanks for the Traceable team for having me on this webinar. Excited to talk about things we've been looking at and doing to solve data loss prevention related use cases. So yeah, I think if you take a tiny step back in time, think about DLP and the related challenges that organizations have had in rolling out successful DLP programs. I think most of us are familiar with the fact that DLP programs have been largely unsuccessful because there's so much of work that needs to be done in terms of setting up the right kind of policies, the right kind of controls, and going about classifying the data in the right kind of classifications that might make sense for one organization. And we've seen time and time again how those classifications differ based on industry, compliance levers. I can give you an example of, we were trying to roll out DLP for a crypto exchange, believe it or not. And they, for them, a lot of the cryptography related language was business critical. Whereas for another business, that can be phishing related information or phishing related triggers. And so the language and the classification goes beyond kind of the basics of this is health specific data or this is financial specific data. There's also business specific data that needs to be classified for traditional DLP tools to kick in and start adding value. So that's where we see those are sort of some of the fundamentals problems we were seeing. So we started to think about how is it that we look at the language that is used in email. And again, email is one channel of communication now. And I know a lot of communication has shifted to Slack and Teams and other such modern communication tools. But email is still critical, at least from our standpoint, because that's where we see anytime a critical business decision still needs to be made. Definitely any confidential or sensitive data needs to be shared, or alignment needs to be driven, particularly between internal teams and an external third party, a vendor in your supply chain. Email is still that critical communication channel, and therefore, we see a lot of possibility and a lot of opportunity for data to be easily leaked and easily shared, particularly when it is shared outbound to an external third party. Particularly because these cloud-based email solutions and cloud-based email storage has made it just dead easy for employees to be able to do that, no matter what device they're using, no matter where they are, and in most cases, in some form of unencrypted fashion. So what we've been doing is looking at how is it that we use the language that is in the being used in the email, whether it's in the body or in the attachments or in the subjects, to really understand the context of what's being shared, and not fixate on specifically just matching a pattern because the customer or the organization cares about matching a social security number, for example. We've gone beyond that in terms of understanding the context of what is being communicated, and therefore applying the right kind of controls to improve the quality of detecting what kind of data leaks are happening on email, a channel that is still fairly prevalent when it comes to corporate communications.
Awesome, thank you. And over to you now, Varavan. API DLP is a key component of SaaS security, where the use case is slightly different with Office 365 or Dropbox or GitHub being the SaaS locations where DLP needs to be implemented. Can you shed some light on how that's being done currently under your understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just like Manu referred, context is very, very important, right? So when you're using GitHub, it might be completely okay for a developer to, upload his source code to their corporate GitHub, but you don't want them to upload the same source code to any GitHub, as an example. And then if you get even a little bit more contextual, you'll say even to your own GitHub, you probably don't want your AWS keys to be hard-coded and written inside the code. So the context is very, very critical when you look at the application. The same idea also extends to something like an Office 365 or a G Suite, where it might be completely okay to use your instances of these specific applications and upload sensitive data there. But other instances where, let's say, any employee can, upload data to his personal Gmail, to his personal Office 365 instance, you want to have that context around, what instance it is. And also from a classification perspective of what is sensitive data, I think we have gone beyond the ages of detecting what is a social security number or a credit card number, because we all know we've tried doing this and there's too many false positives and people can't get their job done. So you want complete context across, what is that company sensitive data and how do you identify that? So adding DLP along with context, and then the third part, especially with APIs, is to coach the end users to do the right thing. This is one of the areas where often people don't have malicious intent, right? The intent is not malicious, but their actions happen, create things which are bad. To give you one example, there's a very large networking vendor, probably the largest networking vendor in the world, and they were going to publish their financial results. And somebody in their finance department said, "Hey, I'm using Corporate Box, and I just want to publish this for you to review it." And he put it as the companyname.com.box.com/Q4/financial results and put the financial results there. Little did he understand that when he created that vanity link in Box, that entire data was public and people could actually read their financial data before the earnings was out. So coaching an end user and making sure you don't make those silly mistakes is probably 80-90% of the problem with DLP, even more important than malicious intent.
That is fascinating and terrifying at the same time. So Sudeep, what are other evolutions on DLP at the API layer that you see coming, given the criticality of the aspect related to API security? For example, we have a lot of concerns around sensitive data now going to ChatGPT. Do APIs play a role there?
Yeah, so that's a good question, Jen. And in the last, since the whole announcement around ChatGPT and all the frenzy around where you can use it for security, Richard and I both are seeing that a lot of our customers actually are on the other side. They're like, "Can you protect us from the sensitive data first before we send everything into ChatGPT, and you saw those announcements even from larger companies like Walmart and others who said, let's figure out a security posture first before we, open this to everybody, right? So that is where, whether it's for the LLM models or even for, benign requests, the one that Vairavan was referring to, right? As in, if you are, in a big financial company or in an insurance company, there's a lot of sensitivity even around what you're typing in, or you might inadvertently cut paste some information from some document, and now you're trying to see if ChatGPT can give you more information around it, and you don't realize that you just put in your sensitive information. And we've already seen the number of hacks which have happened on the ChatGPT server side, or the vulnerabilities there. So you are now exposing your entire sensitive data if you're not being careful about it. So what we've been trying to do in that area is, see, now because of most of these services are exposed as APIs. So a lot of our more mature customers are trying to use that as the funnel, so that whether it is application traffic which needs to go into ChatGPT, or in some cases even user traffic, they're trying to funnel that all through the APIs, and then use different mechanisms on the API security side, so that they have the guardrails and they see the data going in. And then sometimes, even if there is biased information coming out, that's something which large companies cannot take it lightly, because they have compliance, they have a lot of other things to worry about. So if there's anything related to bias when it comes to like loan applications, or when it comes to other financial applications, then you ought to be careful about all of that. So that's where a lot of the evolution of the modern tech stack, especially on the data science and machine learning side, with how that data is funneled through the APIs, is important. The one other thing which goes back to the whole fundamental assumptions around API security is, how do you tie authorization? How do you tie things like scope manipulation? So what kind of sensitive data is going through APIs with a weak posture on the token side, or on the partially authenticated APIs? And we've seen, again, attacks in this area. So correlating that with the data loss aspect is something that we think it's important. So the impact or the confidence of the detections themselves need to reflect that. So that's another area where we are trying to make sure that on the Auth and Auth Z side, tied in with with what you see on the data loss side on the APIs, and then protecting data and going into things around ChatGPT and other sources. Those are the 2 or 3 areas I would definitely say where there's a lot of focus on the API security side.
Okay, thank
And
you.
Jen, if I can, I want to piggyback on that as well from an operator's perspective, because as Sudeep said, he and I have talked a lot about large language model AIs over the last goodness, about 6 months now, and from a CISO's perspective, I think the most important piece of information about these large language model AI solutions is they haven't been operationalized in the enterprise. So, I want to be really blunt here. Like, one dude using ChatGPT is not an enterprise grade function, right? And a group of people that have decided to use a ChatGPT or another LLM AI as part of their business process is not an enterprise operationalization. It's opportunistic, right? And so I would think that with maybe less than one hand, I could count the number of companies on the planet that have actually built the governance frameworks, the control frameworks, the security protocols, and all of the necessary component pieces necessary to protect your corporate data in order to be able to operationalize and leverage ChatGPT or other AI engines. And I think that, as we saw in the news recently, Sam was on the Hill testifying before Congress, saying he thought that compliance and regulatory was a good thing. And that's very odd, because that's inconsistent with the way that tech has typically evolved. But I think that the reality is that the one big missing piece is once your information, your corporate information, gets sucked into those AI engines, there is no regulatory or legal framework available today to redress that and get your information back. Once it's gone and has been absorbed into the Borg, it's gone, right? And I think that these types of serious operational issues are causing a lot of the customers and folks that we're talking to say, I just need to be able to put the brakes on any access to those AI engines to protect my corporate data until I figure out how I'm going to operationalize stuff. And so it's not let's be afraid of AI. It's let's not do something stupid with AI before we have any rules and structure and security solutions to keep bad things from happening.
Thank you, Richard. So Veravan, DLP at the SSE layer has been top of mind for many customers. How is that being implemented typically? Is protection across the internet, endpoint, email, SaaS, private apps, and cloud posture a tall order? How are larger enterprises implementing it?
I think implementation of a comprehensive DLP solution, if you ask anyone, is not easy. You need an army of people, and I think you need to also acknowledge there is nothing that is 100% protection, right? So if you aim for, to say, I want to be absolutely the best, you will end up with excellence, right? So I think you have to be realistic. You have to understand where your data is. And if you think about it, honestly, there is no single solution today that an enterprise can deploy that covers all these different channels. And today, enterprises have deployed multiple solutions. They have an email gateway, they might have a firewall or a proxy, they might have a CASB solution, and then there are new attack vectors that they've not even looked at. And then they have people with a ton of data sitting in S3 and other public clouds. So the problem today is that even if they decide to solve this, they need multiple point products, and these products are going to have different policy constraints. Even as simple as a simple social security number is defined completely different in each of these different products. And then they need to operationalize all these products. Then DLP is not just about allowing and blocking, but then you need to have an instant workflow management. You need to get user response. So this is a tough order, right? So the idea they want to do is they want to consolidate. Yeah, I still don't think there is a single product which solves all these problems. They want to get as minimalist products as possible. They want a large coverage, so something which can look at all, cloud applications, maybe do some email DLP, can do some endpoint DLP. Sometimes they also leverage the capabilities which are possible in the native application, like in Office 365 or Gmail or S3. And they want to start slow. There's a crawl, walk, run. So the crawl is, hey, I get visibility. I understand who is using what. And in the walk phase, typically is, again, more visibility into the data. Where is my sensitive data? And in the run phase, they want surgical blocking of something which is very, very critical. And this is a constant evolution where they have to go and, adjust and change, on a, I would say, at least a quarterly basis. So this is something where it never ends, but they do need to keep up.
Jen, you're on mute.
Sorry. Manu, how do your customers operationalize DLP to protect against business email compromise? Is it mainly policy driven, given high volumes of email data and how they're managing the scale?
Yeah, so thanks for that. Yeah, as Veravan was saying, it's hard to get a platform that cuts across all these different channels. So yeah, just given our focus specifically on email, and I think at least the first point applies to any of these channels. It all boils down to efficacy, right? It boils down to how effective are the DLP is your DLP detections, again, given the context of the business workflows and what is important for your business from a compliance standpoint. At the end of the day, in whether it's email or whether it's endpoint or any of these other channels, the goal is to reduce the level of false positives that DLP solutions are known for, and make it actually effective in terms of preventing that instance of compromise that may come back and hurt you as a business later on. So in order to do our part from an email standpoint, what we've done is we've taken the natural language understanding based platform that we built. This platform, everyone's now been talking about LLMs like it just is a new technology, but we've been using LLMs in the Armorblocks platform for over 4 years. Training our data on large volumes of email data to understand what are the patterns of communication over email, what is being shared typically on attachments, and so on and so forth. We've been applying this technology on the inbound email side to detect things like BEC or business email compromise or instances of that. And over the last 2 years, we've kind of turned it a little bit on the outbound side, looking at the context of what is being shared in email that's leaving your environment or is being shared employee to employee. So one of the examples, it looks like both Veriwan and I are fixated to talk about social security numbers today. So I'll give you an example about we've seen examples where social security numbers can be detected by simple LUN checks. Sorry, not LUN checks, but by simple 10-digit number checks, or some more advanced pattern matching. And you know what? We get customers who are like, well, you're just matching all of my Zoom meeting IDs. I need something that is actually much smarter than that. And that's a really good example where understanding the language in the email, understanding what's being communicated on the outbound side, actually helps us discern whether this is just simply a 10-digit number that might be a valid social security number, or simply is an invitation to a Zoom meeting. So that's what we've built the platform on, again, using the language signals that we have. And then during the time when we roll out the platform for a particular customer, we make sure that during proof of concept and onboarding, we again understand their business context, and we can tweak the policies to get them to a point where we understand the language that they use in business communications, particularly if they're doing anything with vendors, and we monitor that to make sure that the level of true positives is where it needs to be versus false positives. And the customers like, this was great for monitoring, but I don't really have the time to actually look into this because there's no meaningful signal for me. So and then over the last, I would say, 12 months, we've been maturing the solution to add some of the workflow checks that Veriwan was talking about. So we can get the end users to intervene, edit things before they want to send, and remove the sensitive data out of it. They can trigger admin review. We also allow easy encryption of emails only on demand if needed, if they carry sensitive data. So those are some of the workflow pieces that we've added to kind of add that extra layer of security, but also making sure that it works for the organization and doesn't hinder business.
Okay, thank you. So Richard, over to you. We see how broad and complex DLP solutions can be. They range from SSE to email to CASB to, of course, APIs. Is there any way some of this might converge in the future? What are your thoughts?
Well, that's a great question. I wonder if we're not, because of the nature of microservices and APIs and all of the cloud-enabled capabilities, I wonder if we're not moving more towards models that would be represented by specific solutions with tighter integrations that don't require the old point-to-point integration work effort, but really API-driven to be able to get that complete coverage. I think that it's been kind of clear for the last couple of years that monolithic platform approaches for solving all problems are not the desired state for most companies, and they haven't been for quite some time. When we think about the really large names that have substantial security platforms, they just simply can't address either the speed or agility of bad actors, or they can't address the reality of all of these different ways and pathways that data is not just getting moved, but also getting moved out of organizations. So I think that that kind of a monolithic platform, one ring to rule them all, is not realistic for most organizations today. What I think we'll see is more cooperation and tighter collaboration, integration between key partners within the industry to tell stories and craft really good briefs and architectures around how to leverage the capability, the strengths of each of those particular solutions and their capabilities to achieve the type of sufficiency and coverage that's going to be necessary, in this broadly distributed, compute world.
Okay, awesome. And thanks everyone for participating as hosts. This was fascinating. And to all the attendees, thank you for joining. If you are interested in learning more about Traceable, you can scan the QR code you see on your screen and stay tuned for our next webinar in this series.